Let's go back to one of our other main stories this afternoon. The Conservative MP Boris Johnson has been condemned for comparing any efforts by the EU to unify Europe to historical attempts to dominate the continent, such as Hitler's. Well, joining me now is Jacob Rees Mogg from Vote Leave. Very good afternoon to you.
Good
what
afternoon.
do you make of these comments?
Oh, I think what Boris Johnson says is historically true. If you look at what Philip II of Spain tried to do, Louis XIV of France, Napoleon and then Hitler, there have been a succession of attempts to create a single European power run from the continent. And the United Kingdom, England in an earlier stage, have always been opposed to this. So I think he is talking good history.
Is it really, though, the same thing as
No,
what
not.
Hitler wanted to do?
Well, you've got to differentiate between the end and the means. The means is, of course, entirely different. The means of all those previous efforts, from the Armada, from Louis XIV's vast armies, from Napoleon's vast armies, were different from the process by the European Union. But none of them have tried to do it democratically. The EU is doing it by stealth, and whenever there are referendums, it ignores the result. So the French voted on the Constitution, it was brought back as the Lisbon Treaty. The Irish voted against the Lisbon Treaty, they're made to vote against. The Greeks vote against austerity, their finance minister is fired by the EU. So the EU holds democracy in contempt and is doing it by stealth, whereas Hitler, Napoleon, Louis XIV and Philip II were all doing it by military means.
You talked about the end being the same, but are the ends really the same? I mean, Lord Bramall has just issued a statement and he says he knows only too well these comparisons. And he said Hitler's main aim was to create an empire in the East and violently subjugate Europeans. Any connection between that and the EU is simply laughable.
But I'm not suggesting, nor was Boris Johnson, who phrased himself carefully, saying that the EU is trying to do this by force. Though there is now talk of a European army, then there was a German paper on it a couple of weeks ago. But that's not the point. The point is that there have been a number of efforts since the collapse of the Roman Empire to create a single unified Europe run from the continent. And the EU is part of that historic tradition, but it's unquestionably using different means. I wouldn't begin to question what Lord Bramall is saying. He makes a very valid point that Hitler was trying to do it in the most violent and unpleasant way.
And with a different potential outcome
And
as
I would
well.
also say that the European Union is not evil, whereas Hitler was fundamentally evil. So the different means are very important. I'm not a believer that the ends justify the means, and therefore that the means used are comparable. They're clearly not. But the end is unquestionably the same.
What is it? Because what was Hitler's end game then?
It was to have a single Europe.
That he would rule.
He even had proposals in the 1940s for a single currency across his European empire. Look again at Philip II of Spain, who was trying to recreate a Catholic empire, which is why he wanted to bring England back into the Catholic fold, why he sent the Armada, expecting to be able to overrun England. He was looking at it from a religious point of view. Louis XIV was looking at it from a dynastic point of view, that he wanted his family to rule the whole of Europe. And Napoleon was looking at it as a power point of view, with his family taking over so many of the key roles. But all of them, and the EU, wanted a single European state. That is the bit that is in common. That's what Boris Johnson has said. But of course the means are different.
But using Hitler, it's always controversial. He would have known how controversial this would have been.
Just because Hitler is fundamentally evil doesn't mean that all things that relate to him can't be referred to when discussing historic relevances and comparisons. I absolutely agree with you that Hitler's fundamentally evil and his means were evil. The EU is not doing it in an evil way, but that does not deny the fact that its objective is the same.
I was doing a little bit of research on this, and it brought me to Godwin's Law, which is references in a discussion to Hitler. And it says that when you bring it up, once the comparison is made, the discussion is over. Whoever's mentioned the Nazis and Hitler has automatically lost the debate. Would you agree with that? That the damage is done? It's almost like the last possible resort.
I think that references to Hitler need to be carefully made. I think that's absolutely true. And I think the opposition, when complaining about the children coming from Syria, saying it was like the Kindertransport, we're talking absolute nonsense, because children in Europe at the moment are are safe and are in civilized countries. On the other hand, you can't ignore all references to what went on in Germany in the 30s and 40s from historic discussions that, particularly as we get further away from it, the relevance becomes more discussable. So I'm not disagreeing with your underlying point that references to Hitler should be cautiously made, but I think in a grown-up discussion of historic comparators, it is reasonable to mention.
A very, very, very quick final thought. Do you think Boris Johnson was wrong to go down that route?
No, I don't, because he phrased himself very carefully. The Remain campaigners have made rather hysterical comparisons since. If you actually look at what the great Mr. Johnson said, he was very moderate in his phraseology.
Okay, Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Thank you.